Hey, it's Carolyn Brown. I'm the co-founder of Career Care Package. I'm just dropping into this video to let you know we've got a really inspirational career pivot story, and it comes from a very dear friend of mine, Richie, who went from being anxious, depressed and burnt out in his corporate training job at the age of 45 to volunteering his way to a new career. So it's totally inspirational and I really hope you enjoy it.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Naishad Gadani coming to you from sunny Melbourne today. I'm the co-host of the Career Care Package, daily LinkedIn live show that comes to your LinkedIn screen since March. And today is our 124th episode. On today's episode, we are talking about career pivot strategies. And we are also going to talk to Richard, who is our case study today. And we are going to talk about Richard's pivot to new careers through volunteering. So before we bring Richard on, let's welcome Caroline Brown, the co-host of the Career Care Package. Caroline.
Thanks, Nash. And I have to say, I've just been giggling so much, my eyes are starting to water. So if you see me rubbing my eyes during this session, that's why. Look, today we've got Richard Howe on our show, and absolutely delighted to have Richard. He's a very dear friend of mine. And the reason we're interested in talking to Richard is he's had a career pivot that's really interesting. And I know when people make a change or make a pivot, you can think about making a change, you can get counselling to make a change, you can write down your goals and plans, but that's actually where people get stuck. So I think it's going to be really interesting to talk to Richard about how he actually made that pivot or made that change through volunteering. But before I go into a big introduction, I'd just like to say welcome, Richard, to the show.
Thanks, Carolyn. And Nash, it's lovely to be here, so I'm happy to help in any way.
Excellent. So I'm going to dig into your brain and extract bits of pieces of it, display that for everybody to talk to. But I guess a great place to start. So you're now working in alcohol and drug counselling as a support worker. But
I'm glad you added counselling to that sentence.
Yeah, well, we don't mention that bit. So I guess a good place to start would be really just to tell people about, what you're actually doing now and what their job involves and what you actually enjoy about it.
Sure. There is counselling involved. I mean, the job's called a AOD, which stands for Alcohol and Other Drug Support Worker. And I work in a withdrawal unit, which is up in the Heidelberg area of Melbourne. And it's a 16-bed facility, so 12 of those beds are for adults. And the other 4 beds are also for adults, but it's a mother-baby unit that was built about 3 or 4 years ago. So it's for mums with young bubs, or it may in fact be mums who have literally just come out of hospital and they've just had a baby. Baby may be with them or may not be with them. And it's a unit that has nursing staff in it. It's a residential unit, so people typically are there for between 7 and 14 days, literally going through a withdrawal process of a substance. So that might be alcohol or something else. And my role there is, as a support worker, is to support them through that program process, and also to help them with the process of looking at what their next steps will be. And also facilitating daily lifestyle type activities like cooking, and they actually look after the facility and take care of their own needs quite independently as part of that process. So that involves cooking, a bit of cleaning, that sort of stuff. So, so there's that side of it. And then there's also a role there that's the education and activities worker. And that was initially what I actually applied for. What I now do is I effectively do that is on a fill-in basis. So I'm actually doing that at the moment because one of those workers is away for about 3 months as a direct result of COVID. So I'm doing that sort of probably 60% of the time, and the other 40% of my my work time is the support worker role.
Mm.
And you asked me, I think, too, why I love it.
Yeah.
Well, what I enjoy about it.
Yeah.
It is far and away one of the best environments I've ever worked in, as far as the drug and alcohol sector. And what I love about it is there is such immediate and ongoing reward. I get an enormous amount of job satisfaction because there are so many opportunities in a given day where I'm helping somebody in a really significant way that to me seems really quite small, like helping somebody to learn how to chop up a carrot, or, it could be that minor, but to them, they've never learned how to look after themselves or to cook. So for them, it can be remarkably significant, and it can be a step towards improving their self-esteem. So I just feel absolutely blessed and lucky to be in such an environment where that's kind of happening for me all the time.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I know we're going to talk a bit about it, but that's not where you started your career. So you started so radically different from where you started. So maybe tell people about that journey, like what
Sure.
you changed from.
Yeah, I never in a million years would have imagined myself working in the drug and alcohol sector if I went back 10 years ago. My background before that was administration, recruitment, customer service, and I also worked for a health fund for about 10 years immediately prior to what I guess you would classify as this, pivot process that I went through to change my career. And there I had moved from customer service into corporate training. I'd started to realise that I was completely disconnected to all my passions, and one of my passions was teaching people, or the process of learning and helping adults. As a small kid, I'd wanted to be a teacher, and then seeing what I was like at school and the awful kid that I was, that completely put me off teaching. But I guess reconnected with that when I was at HCF and got an opportunity to move into their training department. The problems with it was, though, that I learnt an awful lot, but it was a large company, thousands of people. You were training hundreds and hundreds of people every week. It got to the point where it felt very much like you were part of a battery chicken farm, and you just had to process people through training programs. You had to get an end result for them all the time. And I rationalised the job satisfaction that I was, often what I was doing was I was involved in helping them to learn their job in a call centre or learn their job in a branch. And I rationalised that I was helping them greatly go through that process. But the reality, when I, searched my soul, was that I thought, if you took me out of the equation, they would have ultimately learned how to do the job regardless. And so it just lost meaning for me. And the other thing that happened was that I was actually sort of in quite a dysfunctional team. There was some dysfunctional staff there, and I was effectively bullied for about 3 years in that area. And I ultimately just had to get out of there. It did awful things to my self-esteem. I found myself highly anxious and depressed. I went through quite a serious depressive episode. And at the same time, my parents were quite ill up in Queensland, and that gave me a catalyst to just quit and get out of there. But I guess one of the little light bulb moments that happened whilst I was there was a couple of people that I had to actually help because they were working in country branches, and they had almost zero computer skills, and in fact they were almost genetically phobic of a computer. And I was able to convince their regional manager to allow me to work with them for a few days, and I kind of just winged it, but I worked through a process with them of trying to personally get them over that phobia. And it was that one-on-one work that I did with them that actually became a real light bulb moment that I needed to be doing more personalised one-on-one help. Adult learning type help. Yeah.
Can I ask you about that? Because I think sometimes we get signals that we ignore, right? Or they don't mean anything to us at the time, or we don't absorb them as signals. So what actually helped like what did that signal feel like for you with when you were helping those people?
Yeah, the level of satisfaction I got in that process, I just felt I was. It's a really good question, and I'm glad that you're kind of getting me to focus on that, because when I think about it, it would have been in the middle of all that bullying process, and it would have been in that middle of, you know, working 10 or 12-hour days and feeling incredibly stressed and feeling really bad about myself, actually, and having pretty poor self-esteem. But in the middle of all that, somehow I found the ability to connect with those women and to identify with them. I was their age, and I could completely appreciate phobia of computers. And I was thrown into an environment in that training department where we had a room full of computers set up with printers, where it was almost like a pretend branch, where you would get 15 people in from all over New South Wales that had to be taught how to use those computers and print off documents for the customer at the counter. And at times those computers would crash, and I was there and had to get it sorted, because you couldn't just say, can you come back tomorrow? They'd flown in for a week of training. So I could appreciate that phobia. And to see the way in which I was able to, or they were able to sort of lower their anxiety levels and actually learn. And that was a direct result of my input to the process. And that just blew my mind, that I thought, okay, right, that's where my passion for learning is. And that's what I need to connect with. I need to find, I probably didn't think it at the time, but I, over time, realized I need jobs that have that in it for me, you know? Yeah.
And what did it feel like to quit? Was there
fantastic.
Yeah.
The good thing was that I did, I think it was really important to my self-esteem, and this can't always happen for people, but I did address some of those issues with the manager at the time. I got to the point where I was able to be assertive and made some points about what was actually occurring, and then I realized that they were not going to change. And so there was a comfort and a quiet in me about the process of quitting, and it was almost like I'd resolved that side of things, and I could now get out of there and move on with things, you know. Yeah. But yeah, it felt fantastic.
Yeah. She looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes. So just wanted to welcome Balin, Usha, Amit, and Poonam. You know, welcome to the show. And for anybody else who's also listening or watching, if you got questions for Richard, or just to figure out, you know, because I think what Richard shared is that, you know, there are moments that happen that really say that there's an opportune moment for us to change something, and grabbing them, understanding that, and not kind of overlooking their emotion is also very important, part of the process, rather than sliding it. No, I don't think so. That there was just one thing that I've learned, one thing that I noticed, what really makes me happy, and not overlooking that is also incredibly useful. So, we'll come to your question, as well, Richard. So did you just simply resign, and then you decided that, look, I'll probably now go and figure out what do I want to do?
That's exactly what happened. And it's interesting, that idea of sort of pivoting your career. I can tell you now, there was no pivoting going on at that moment. There was, I got to get out of here, and I've got to run away as quickly as possible. And it was almost like I was running back to mummy and daddy. Like that's kind of literally what I did. I was not in a good mental state. And so but part of the process too, I guess, is just recognizing that there's times when you just need to put down your tools, and you need to just have a breather. And I needed, what we would now call self-care and mental health time, and that's what going up to Queensland did. And the wonderful thing about it too was that I had, parents that had done so much for me, all through my life. This was now an opportunity to give back. And I absolutely felt like, I had to look at the positives, and the positives absolutely were this is a wonderful opportunity for me to give back. And it's not a bad thing that I'm physically removing myself from the city as well. And I'm going to a new city, and it's, in a lot of ways, this is now a new life, effectively, or it was for me at the time. And it was over a period of time that I then had to, just sort of say to myself, okay, well, what are going to be the next steps? And I didn't feel comfortable, I've got to say, with just not working. I had periods in my life where I had not worked for 3 or 4 months, and often they were actually mental health related, quite frankly. But over the course of probably the first 3 to 6 months, I then sort of started thinking, okay, well, I'm not in any state to take on paid employment, but I need to find a way where I can keep my finger in the pie of the work environment. And that's where volunteering came to me. And I don't exactly remember, but I would think somebody probably mentioned it to me at that time too. It probably wasn't just out of my head. The whole adult teaching thing, while I had been at HCF, I'd done a degree in adult education, so I was qualified. And I was really interested. I've always been fascinated by social justice. It's a real hot button topic for me. Any sort of discrimination, is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I've always been interested in the process of refugees and migrants. And that's a passion that Carolyn and I share. And I was looking around at possibly working as, getting into maybe the TAFE system of helping migrants learn how to speak English, even though I didn't have a qualification in English. And so that's kind of what led me to be looking around Gold Coast TAFE. And that's when I discovered that they actually had a program there of volunteer tutors that helped in their literacy and numeracy department. And they put you through a free 6-week course. And then you were sitting in the classroom with another teacher, but you were just like a teacher's assistant effectively. And I found out that they did work with special needs adults in literacy and numeracy. And straight away I thought, bingo, that sort of sounds like something that's really meaningful and really personal, the sort of thing that I connected with. So I jumped into that, and that gave me something to do while I was sort of dealing with other issues, and looking after mum and dad. And it then started to lead to a whole heap of other things.
Yeah. So with the volunteering, did that, again, how did you know that sort of that was the right thing for you to do at that time? Like, what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? I think sometimes, for me anyway, you don't know it's the right fit. You just know it's different, and you know that maybe you need to give something new a go. I was a 45-year-old, white male who had been used to full-time paid employment, and I had to do a whole mental shift about what job, work and career meant to me and how that defined me. And so part of it was going through that process, but also it was just, how did I know that it was the right thing to do or the right thing for me? It was the complete polar opposite of corporate training. So, it was the complete polar opposite of the environment that I'd come from that was quite dysfunctional. And what I was amazed at when I got into that environment, when you think about it, it's a group of teachers that work in literacy and numeracy, and they work with special needs adults. So they tend to be community focused, I guess. They tend to be the sort of people that are thinking about other people rather than themselves. And in that whole safe environment, for the first time in my life, I found myself surrounded by a group of people that were fairly regularly saying, "Great to have you here, Richard.
Yeah.
You're wonderful. You're great. We like what you're doing," even when it was on a volunteer basis. And it wasn't that I hadn't worked in environments where people said, "Good job." But there's a difference between living almost with people that's the wrong way to say it. Working with people that live that. They live that sort of thinking,
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a very similar experience when I finished in my corporate job, and I look back on it and I was low-level depression and anxious. Anxiety as well. The way that plays out for me is sort of head goes round in circles and thought processes. But I volunteered at the Asylum Seeker Centre, and it was in this terrace house in Surrey Hills. And it was run down, and people were working out of former bedrooms that had been converted to offices, and everyone was in casual. And people were really happy to have me there. And it was just nice to see that work could be meaningful in a different context. But exactly what you're saying, people were happy to see me. And I'm like, it's just really great boost to...
Absolutely. To your self-esteem.
Yeah.
And how you feel about yourself. And you pick up on a really good point there too, Carolyn, because I'm a massively passionate proponent of volunteer work as a means to boosting your self-esteem, keeping yourself in the job market, but also using it to pivot your career and, what we would now be pivoting your career. And what I learnt from that process was that volunteering is almost unique in a lot of ways, in that it puts you in an environment where, because you're coming in and you're doing stuff for people for no money, they are thrilled to have you there. They are absolutely over the moon. They don't care about your other faults. They don't care if you don't put the toilet seat down in the staff toilet, They are thrilled to have you there. And, if you're in a situation where you can't commit to being there all the time, and you find, you wake up and there's a day when you just can't face it, they're okay with you not being there, because guess what? They weren't paying you anyway. So you have more control over the commitment that you give whilst you're in that volunteer situation. And I think that's a really important part of it. But also, what then also happens is they often bend over backwards as they get to know you to want to help you.
Yeah.
So if you get talking about what your interests are, what your passions are, why you're there, where you want to be, you find them helping you out. And I think a key thing that I would say to anybody that's looking at volunteering as and one of the tips is that, and you know me, Carolyn, you know that I think it's really important to be comfortable talking about yourself. And you know me, Carolyn, I'm very comfortable talking about myself. But you know what? If you're not, then see that as, or pivot it as, talking about your passions. Most people can talk about their passions. And, what I found was that all of a sudden I had people in that work environment. I have a work mentor that I met while I was at TAFE that is still kind of like a work and career mentor. And we've stayed in touch and we catch up. She's still up on the Gold Coast, Jill. But she has been a passionate proponent of me and a backer of me. And she's the one that actually invited me to start working as a TAFE teacher in Mirakai, which is the residential rehab unit or facility up on the Gold Coast. And that was my first introduction to drug and alcohol work. And I never in a million years would have thought of doing that. And I didn't even know that they were doing that as part of their programs. And she saw something in me and she sort of said, it takes a unique type of teacher to work in that environment. You need to have particular skills and personal attributes. And she basically just said, I think you have them. And that's why I want to put you in there. And so that was a wonderful thing, and can I talk about some other volunteer work that I did that I think is really relevant too? Yeah, because at the same time, because I had that interest in the migrant area, I ended up, it just happened to be that there was a migrant centre below the main part of TAFE on the Gold Coast. And I was working at a completely different campus. I had not made that connection at all. But I don't even remember. I think I just Googled migrants and the Gold Coast and maybe work or something like that, and came across this migrant centre, and I ended up volunteering there. And Anna, who manages that migrant centre, again, is somebody that I still keep in touch with, and she became this amazing advocate for me. She just bowled me over constantly where, they're so grateful to have you there helping out. And she just saw something in me. And I remember one day I walked into the office and she said, "Oh my God, Richard, I'm so glad you're here." And it was almost like she was desperate. And she said, I've got this meeting that I've got to go to, and I need you to come along to the meeting. And it's with the director of TAFE upstairs. She's the director of, this particular division. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I think she talked about, it was either it wasn't community services, but I think it was literacy and numeracy or something like that. And I sort of thought, why do you need me at that meeting? I have no expertise in what you're talking about. And so we trot upstairs, we get into this meeting, and there's this woman there, Maxine, and Anna introduces me, and she just says, "Maxine, this is Richard. He's working with us, volunteering," and she gave like a very brief little rundown of where I'd come from, and she just said, "But and Richard is absolutely wonderful, and we're so lucky to have him. But I'm going to just let Richard tell you all about Richard." And so she just brought me up there to put me in front of this director who she knew was responsible for the English language program with migrants, and that's why she wanted me to meet this person. And that person ended up becoming ultimately my boss through a different avenue. But so having people around like that, it's a really significant part of the volunteering process.
Yeah, so she sort of connected you to these people, and these opportunities came out of that. Did you have a question, Nate? Because I've wanted to stick another question in, or you?
No. I just wanted to also, a couple of things. One of my friend who used to live in Melbourne now has gone back to India. His wife never applied for a job, and always started to work in Salvation Army op shop. Did therefore she's a trained doctor, but in Indian medicine, not the general practice one. So she could not practice here. And she saw that my friend started to work, so she saw this opportunity, went around and saw this opportunity to work in a Salvation Army. And she said, "I'm not doing anything. I'll just started work there for a couple of days." After after 3 months, they gave her a casual role for 1 or 2 days. That became permanent. And in 2 years, she became a store manager. And I think after 1 year, she was managing 2-3 stores. Did not even apply for a single job. Never prepared her resume at all. But it's just that she took that chance. And I think volunteering is, in my view, is also that you don't know, but you just have to take the chance. You got to start with something, right? You got to start with maybe there's some interest here. I'm interested in education. I'm interested in migrants. So let me marry this up and find out something that is more meaningful. And you go in volunteering, and that's Richard, I would sort of also understand from you that you start volunteering not at all from that this is going to ultimately lead me somewhere. You do it because you feel right about it, because you feel connected to it. And last thing that I would say, volunteering, is something that I've found very flavorsome in Australia. In India, we do volunteering, but that was around festivals or around religious events.
Okay.
Obviously it is becoming now, a lot of mainstream now that they could Teach India, a lot of other movements are happening. But when I was there, I would volunteer because there is a festival there and people need some people to do things around, right? But I think in Australia only I found that people are genuinely have one cause in their life, maybe about breast cancer awareness, or maybe about cancer, maybe anything. And I find that so fascinating. Tell us about some of the other impact that volunteering had apart from the career, about any other character building, anything else that you kind of learned from it.
Sure. I think as you were talking about that, I was sort of thinking of the phrase, it sort of feeds your soul to do volunteering work. And I think that's really important as part of your self-esteem and as part of the the process of self-care. It's about giving back. And, I think you actually get a lot from giving. But you have to be in a situation where you've looked after yourself enough and you're looking after your own needs to be in a position to be able to authentically give. And so it can be a complicated process, but when you're struggling, the other side of it, I guess, too, though, is when you're struggling to look after yourself, to do what you ultimately need to do for yourself, like I was with job and career, it's so connected to your self-esteem and your confidence. And I had no confidence. I was in no position to be putting myself out there looking for work, because let's face it, it's stressful even at the best of times to be looking for work, to get your resume together, to be presentable, to go to an interview. You can't help but, feel at times that you're being judged, and when you don't get the job, you're being rejected. And if your self-esteem is right down, my God, how could you possibly consider doing that? The nice thing about volunteering is that you're taking all that pressure off yourself. There's very little expectation from the organisation. And if you think about it, I think often there's less expectation on yourself as well. You can just sort of give it a stab, see how it goes. I'm going to do this because I know it is going to make myself feel better about myself, because I'm giving. But I'm also, there's no doubt that I was absolutely using it as a way to keep my finger in the job work environment. And I absolutely had a passion and an interest in hopefully turning it somehow into a career, pivoting it into, work with migrants, work with refugees. Now, what changed that was when I went up for that meeting with Maxine, and I had already taken myself off down to Sydney for about a 4 to 6 week period, and I'd done a course in, I think the Australian version of it is TESOL, Teaching English as a Second Language, but I did the University of Cambridge version, which is it's the British version of it. And because I knew I needed some sort of qualification in how to teach English as a second language, I thought I have no qualification in it. I came back, and so they took our money. We did the course. It was a wonderful course, but right at the end of the course, they then told us, yeah, by the way, there's kind of no work out there. And I thought, that wasn't in the brochure. We all felt exactly the same way. There was about 8 of us in the class. We all thought, are you serious? You're telling us that on our last day, you've called it career opportunities, and you're basically saying there are no career opportunities. But thank you, Anyway, I get back up to the Gold Coast, and I'm in front of Maxine, and Maxine basically said, yeah, there aren't a lot of career opportunities. And to be able to do that work, I would have actually needed to go and get another qualification. And I just thought, you know what? I've just got to call it quits on that as an option. That's just not going to work. But the good thing was I'd already been introduced to the whole special needs area and literacy and numeracy there, and I was really enjoying it. And at one point I was asked if I could just sort of do a bit of volunteer work too with 3 guys that they brought down from a rehab up in the hinterland called Fairhaven, and they couldn't read at all. And particularly there was this middle-aged guy that was a little bit older than me that literally could not read or write. And I spent quite a bit of time with him over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. And I had to just kind of wing it and sort of think, okay, well, how am I going to help him? And I don't want to treat him like he's a 5-year-old. I'm sure that's you don't want to start getting kids kindergarten books out. That's going to patronize him. So I basically just said, why do you want to learn to read and write? And his answer was quite surprising. He said, for me anyway, he said, I just want to be able to read the newspaper, because all my mates read the newspaper and I can't talk about the things that they're talking about. So for him, it was about social connection. It wasn't about getting a job, or, I just assumed there was a more lofty goal, but there wasn't. And so I taught him through the newspaper. And to be perfectly honest, I grabbed a newspaper that would be the equivalent of, I don't know, I don't want to offend people down here in Melbourne, but there was the Gold Coast version of the one that was ranty and very, it was almost like Pauline Hanson had written the newspaper.
You just deleted the plain bits.
Yeah. But it was written in very simple terms, and that's what he needed. He needed small words, simple, to the point, and that worked for him.
Yeah.
So, it just ends up taking you in all different directions. And what I was just going to quickly add was I ended up with a job out of that whole process of, even though the migrant side of things had been, closed off. I got to know some of the other women that did the volunteer tutoring course at TAFE, and none of them, in fact, there was a group of about 10 or 15 of us, and I was actually, funnily enough, the only one that ended up volunteer tutoring. Everyone else ended up getting work in other areas, so they didn't end up having to do volunteer work. They just got paid work, or they just decided not to bother. But there was one woman that ended up working for a mining company on the Gold Coast called Minerals Technology, and they produced a whole lot of separation machinery for separating ore and all that sort of stuff. And I'd kept in touch with her. She became this, lifelong friend. And there was a group of us that used to go out and hang around socially. And she knew that I'd done this course in teaching English as a second language. And they had a French, kind of like a robotics engineer there, but it wasn't robotics. It was just machinery. And his job was to go into the factory and talk to Aussie workers in a noisy factory and find out what was wrong with the design of the machinery so that he could redesign the machinery. And the problem was he had a thick French accent. And he was very disliked in that factory because he wasn't dinky die and they couldn't understand him. And he was asking all these weird questions. But the main thing was they couldn't understand his English, even though he was speaking English. So she asked me if I wanted to come in and get paid to teach him to lose his French accent. So it wasn't to really teach him English, it was to teach him how to not speak like French English, to sound a bit more dinky-die. So, that wasn't really part of the course that I did. So, but I thought, what the hell, I'll give that a stab. That kind of sounds like fun. And so I then had to go home after I'd had a meeting with the manager, and I had to pick an hourly rate out of my head and, probably sold myself short. But anyway, I had to then go home and Google, why do French people who speak English have trouble being understood, or something like that. I just had to Google it. I thought, I have no clue why that, and I read all this stuff about it was the sounds in English that we make that are not present in French. And for that reason, we do things with our mouths and our tongues that they don't do when they're speaking the language, and that was why they have a lot of trouble. And apparently out of most of all the Western European languages, it's French that have the most trouble getting their tongues around English. And so, I just sort of Googled it and printed some stuff off and kind of winged it. Did that for a few months and kind of got away with it, bluffed my way through. But his accent did kind of disappear.
Yeah.
But the problem was he didn't practice it. His English was amazing. He was pretty much self-taught, and his grammar and all that, it was faultless almost. It was just the fact that he had an accent. But the really funny thing was that these women that I used to catch up, when they found out that I was going to be doing that as a job, they said to me, "Don't get rid of his accent. That's what makes French men sexy."
Rich, I want to sort of pull out a few themes actually from stuff that you've been talking about like how to make the most of that volunteer experience. And one of them, I think you keep referring to catching up and, making friends and that type of thing. So it sounds like building those relationships, but then also from what you've just said, just having a go at something, like coming from the mindset that I can't do it now, but I probably can do it. So how do I make it happen? Would they be two things that have been really important in making the most of the volunteer experience? Yeah.
I mean, totally. Those two things are so a part of it, and it's about making those connections and, and I think that's what's so great about volunteering. It makes that connection process easier because, like we've already said, you walk in the door and they already love you. Wow, here's a piece of meat effectively that we haven't had to pay for, that can do work, you know. Here's a slab or whatever you want to call it, you know. And so they're thrilled to see you, and they're thrilled to have you there, and that tends to just drop that, you know. It means that building rapport is easier, you know. And obviously, ultimately, they've still then got to want to continue to connect with you, but you know, that's just, it makes it a lot easier. And I've forgotten what the other point was that you wanted to pick up on.
Yeah, just about being able to, because I remember my first experience of volunteering was teaching asylum seekers a computer, but I quickly segued that into writing ministerial applications and letters and doing advocacy work.
Yeah.
My experience in that. So I guess, I was just thinking, reflecting with your experience about teaching the French guy how to sound less French. I mean,
yes.
You had to teach yourself that first. So
I did.
Yeah.
And you know what? I've got to admit, you know, one of the first things that went through my mind was, one, how the hell am I ever going to do that? I've got no clue how to do that. But also I thought, number two, this is going to make a really good dinner party story.
Well, I hope it's
whether it works or not, like, who the hell has a job doing that, you know? So, but it is so much about just, and I must say that I think that's one of the strengths that I'm very lucky to have had for a long time. I've recognised that all of your growth is often not when things are going smoothly, and the process of jumping in and just giving something a go, even though you're sitting there thinking, part of you is thinking, I could stuff this up so easily because I really don't know how I'm gonna do it. But you know what? You can turn that around to, this is a great opportunity, and there is a pleasure in using your curiosity to discover and work out how you're going to do something. And a big part of that too is I've never been good at asking for help or accepting help, and I've had to over the years learn to be more accepting of that. And a psychologist years ago once said to me, you know, Richard, you know, you've got perfectionist tendencies and you want to be good at everything. Sometimes being really good at something is employing the person that's really good at it, or getting help from the person that's really good at it. That's you being smart, pulling together a group of people that in a combined way can do a far better job than any one of you could. And I thought that they're really wise words, and I kind of held on to that. So yeah, it's about accepting that help, and that's certainly what I've had, and that's helped so much in the past few years that I've found these mentors and I've identified them, and when they've or just people that have sort of thrown this new idea at me, you know, of a new job option or a new volunteering option, I've just sort of, sometimes I've absolutely said no, because I knew it didn't suit me. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do. But an example of that too was at TAFE, I got offered, it was the first time that I got offered sort of a contract of full-time work. Before that, it had all been casual. And it was almost what all the teachers had to do. If you wanted to end up working with the special needs adults, you had to work with the 15 to 17-year-old disenfranchised, disillusioned youth that had either been bullied at school or were the bullies, and they were now doing their year 10 equivalent at TAFE. And so I did that for, I think it was about 3 months. It wasn't any longer than that, because I knew that that's what I had to do to get to where I wanted to be. But my God, that was so not the right job for me. I just could not really relate to 15 to 17-year-old kids. And so I had to get out of that. But I gave it a go, and doing it told me that, no, it wasn't for me. And that's okay. That's okay to kind of identify that, okay, now I know that I can't do that. And I think one of the important parts of that is just to have a bit of introspection and say, okay, why wasn't it good for me? So identify the characteristics of it that don't match what you need or who you are, and then obviously next time make sure that you're avoiding those things. Yeah.
Absolutely, Richard. Look, it's been fascinating to pick up the story because I think there are in these times I think many people are looking at different ways to really find some meaning, really find some purpose because it is difficult time. I was listening to a presentation today that said that effectively right now there are 1 million people who are unemployed and 500,000 is purely just because of the impact of COVID-19. Now, these numbers are absolutely mind-numbing. When I knew, but when you listen to it again, it just heart goes out to people who are really doing it very, very tough. And the idea of sharing Richard's story was to give listeners another perspective on what can be done to help you to spark some interest, to think a little bit more differently about your career. It's not necessarily that you will, if you start to work as Poonam is saying, Poonam is working, in volunteering work. It's not, Poonam, just about that whether you work in IT, whether your vocation is IT, you don't find any spark, anything else from any other dimension. I think that is also a pitfall that we get into. And you do volunteering, as I really loved what Richard said, is that you're feeding your soul. If you're really enjoying that work, you're in this moment, I'm pretty sure I have experienced, spark of imagination if I'm involved into something that I really enjoy. Whether that is just to play cricket with my son for 1 hour, but I'm constantly thinking about various things that is coming to my head, and I think that is very, very important for us. Is that we got to allow ourselves to submerge into something which is more powerful than us, and take that to the process. Just go with the process, Richard. So again, Richard, thank you very much, and I can confirm that what Richard was drinking was tea.
It's iced tea. Yeah, it's not alcohol. Is it okay if I just very, very quickly touch on something that you've brought up there, Nash? Because I think there's another element to it as well. Sometimes the volunteering work or the casual work can be about just exposing yourself to an area that you're not comfortable with, where you know that it would be valuable to develop some skill or knowledge. And where I think that happened for me was actually with Carolyn and myself. I've known Carolyn for a lot of years, and she could see what was happening for me during this period. And she actually asked me if I wanted to get involved in doing a bit of writing for her. And I can't remember, Carolyn, what you call it, but you've also always got this very important sounding title for what I was doing. But I was basically just writing a few blogs, I can never bloody well remember what you used to call it, but I just used to call it writing a few blogs, but it exposed me to social media. It exposed me to the internet in ways that I'd never been exposed before. And and I just thought, I've got no clue about all that, but I know that that's a really useful skill to have, and so it wasn't volunteer work, but for me, it almost felt like I was helping out a friend as well, and yeah, so that was another aspect to it.
And it's funny with that, I have to say, damn you, but you wrote the most popular article on my blog. I'm like, I've created.
God, I was wondering how long it'd take you to mention that.
Exactly. I remember that now, but it still gets views. And in fact, I have to say something about that. Richard wrote this article about getting a job in the mines when everybody wanted to get a job in the mines without experience. And that article, might have been 6 or 7 years later, an SBS journalist picked up that article and rang me and said, can I speak to Richard Howe, who wrote that article? And then you got interviewed for it. So,
yeah.
But seriously, this is, an example of put yourself out there and see what happens, and you never know what comes. So Richard's not writing on my blog. I've put an end to that now.
No, I'm banned. But that's interesting too, Carolyn, because I had no understanding or knowledge about that, but I happen to have a nephew who was working in the mines. So I interviewed him, and that was the basis for that whole article.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes it's just about someone you happen to know. It's got nothing really to do with your job. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Carolyn, you're welcome.
Oh, didn't I say thank you?
Yeah, I think you're welcome, because I think I propped up your entire business, didn't I?
We're just going to shut this conversation down now.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, it's been fun to have you on, and yeah, thanks for joining and being up. So if you like what you see, please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on LinkedIn, if you can follow the hashtag Career Care Package. And Naish, I'll throw back to you to do the sign off.